Hi everyone, it's Cass. Welcome back to my channel, What Cass Read. Today I'm going to be highlighting an author that I have mentioned several times before, but this is an author that I have been working my way through, and that is Stephen King. I decided a couple of years ago, actually. I've been slowly but surely, very roundabout way, just picking up Stephen King books whenever the mood strikes. And in the last 2 years, I've made a little bit more of a concentrated effort on picking things up, but I've still only read 14 books of his, and I wanted to just give an update on how that's been going, because now I've read 14 books of one single author, and I think that's a good, that's a good number of books to give me a pretty solid opinion on how I feel about his writing. This isn't going to be anything super intellectual, it's just going to be me going down the list of the Stephen King books that I have currently read and what I've rated them, and this is definitely like my definitive ranking right now. So, like I said, these books are definitely in an order of my least favorite to favorite. I haven't rated anything of Stephen King's below a 3-star, so that feels good to me that like I have still consistently enjoyed the books of his that I've read. I've like literally not hated anything, which is really good. There's like kind of a method to my madness in terms of like the ones that I've been picking up and the ones that maybe aren't even on this list. And I think it has a lot to do with this first book. So let's just talk about this. This is Needful Things. This is actually the very first Stephen King book that I read, and I rated this 3 out of 5 stars. Looking back on it, I don't think this should have been my first Stephen King book at all, and I wouldn't recommend it to be someone's first Stephen King book at all. So there's that. Now, did I enjoy it? Yes. It was weird, but like, I didn't hate it, but there's some things that were off, and I think that's what the goal of this book was, and if that was the goal, then Stephen King definitely accomplished that with me. We are in the town of Castle Rock, Maine, so it's one of his fictional towns where there's just like a lot of weird things that happen. And we see this brand new shop that has been opened by this man named Leland Gaunt. It's all coming back to me now. The things that are inside his shop are not necessarily things that anyone in the general public would care about. But when you go into Needful Things, you will find something that you like. Not only like, but it's like your deepest, darkest desire. You will find that inside Needful Things. And Leland Gaunt isn't selling it for money. He's selling it in exchange for a request. So that could get very, very dangerous. So that's all I'll say about that. Yeah, maybe he wants a little bit of money, but you know, he's asking you for a very specific request. This book was bonkers. And just to have this be like my first Stephen King novel, I feel like maybe I ripped off the Band-Aid a little too aggressively because the requests that were made were very sinister and disturbing. Leland Gaunt was a very sinister and disturbing character, but the madness of the town, the character work of the town, that's all Telltale Stephen King, which I greatly enjoyed. And that's probably what saved it and made it a 3-star and not lower. Where I was like, man, this was weird and this was crazy and I'm not really sure if I liked it, but I did like it. That's how I felt about Needful Things. Yeah, can't say that I would recommend that particular book being like your first, go ahead, jump in. It was not the route to go. Then the next book. I had high hopes for this next book. I definitely read like in my earlier exploration of Stephen King, and I had high hopes for this one because this is one of his books that has a movie adaptation, and that is Misery. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. And so for those who don't know, this follows Paul Sheldon, who is a novelist, and Annie Wilkes. Annie Wilkes is a huge superfan. He ends up running his car off the road. Annie Wilkes is here to save the day. But she's actually not here to save the day. She's actually here to torture him and get him to finish the last novel that he wrote according to her liking. And I thought I would love this so much. I had super high hopes. I maybe put a little too much stock into this, and I was bored for most of it. I thought it was going to get a little bit more sinister than it had. And I would have been okay with that, and I would have been like fully prepared for it. Not that Annie Wilkes isn't like a disturbed individual in terms of like the things that she does to Paul Sheldon and her house. Yeah. everybody says it's one of his best, and it wasn't. It wasn't for me. And Kathy Bates won the Academy Award, so maybe this is better on screen. Maybe I need to watch Kathy Bates and then get a new appreciation. Because to be honest, of all the Stephen King books that I've read, I've only watched one adaptation, one film adaptation of the books that I've read. That is an interesting fact. And for, like, King superfans, you might be disappointed to find out which one it was. Oh no. So maybe I should give the screen version a go. I'm not sure, but this one ended up being a 3 out of 5 stars simply because I was bored. All right, then this is the most recent read of mine that is in my King library. This is Firestarter, and I read this in the month of February this year, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. We follow Charlie and Andy. Andy was a college kid when he met his wife, and they were both a part of these lab experiments. And the result of those lab experiments meant that they came away with extra powers. Well, when they got married, they had a daughter, and she was born with extra powers without any lab experiments necessary. And so when the people who conducted those experiments on Andy and his wife, they wanted to study her, they wanted to get to know her. So this book is a lot of Andy and Charlie, his daughter, on the run. And it was fun. I liked it. I did enjoy it, which is why it was good. It was good. That's why I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. But again, there were pieces in here where it just kind of dragged on a little bit for me. So that's why I gave it a 3 out of 5 star. Still happy to have read this, and maybe I'll watch the screen adaptation of this one. If you've seen the Drew Barrymore version versus the newest edition, I forget the young actress who plays Charlie. I don't know, if you've seen any of those, let me know your recommendation, or do you even recommend it at all? And then the next 3 out of 5 star read was like a big hyped kind of Stephen King book. And I actually saved it for last year's Halloween read because I was like, you know, I think Halloween's a good time to read this book, and that is Pet Sematary. I did the audiobook version of this with Michael C. Hall narrating, so that was really great, and that was really fun. I thought he did an excellent job. This one was just odd. I thought it would be more terrifying than it was. Thankfully, it wasn't as terrifying as it could be. I mean, it definitely, where I was like, I don't know if I should be reading this, like, where it was like just a little on the scary side, and you're like, should I keep going with this? I'm not sure. I'm feeling very uncomfortable sensations. So it definitely accomplished its goal that way. I forget all the characters' names, and because I don't have a physical copy of this book, you're just gonna have to like make do with my memory. But we followed this man and his family. They have just moved into this brand new house. In the surrounding area, there is a Native American burial ground, and through those burial grounds, a lot of the kids of the neighborhood, a lot of the people of the neighborhood have buried their dead pets and dead animals, and things happen to those animals. Oh yeah, oh now I'm getting right back into the feels of this book. The ending like literally just came back into my mind. I was sufficiently creeped out now that I remember the ending. The ending really got to me and creeped me out. And I didn't like it. And I was like, oh, why did he have to go there? So again, there were just some parts where like I would kind of like skim along, which kind of like is my standard go-to. Like if I find myself like just kind of like skimming through some passages, then I know that it's not a 4-star. And so that's usually what like my mental note is, to be like, yeah, this is, you know, I'm treating this like a 3-star read because I tend to be skimming a little bit more. So while I was listening to it, there were definitely times where I was checking out a little bit. I mean, it delivered. It delivered on the promise of a pet cemetery. The impact that it had on this family and the house that they lived in and the consequences of their life of living in this new place right next to a creepy area. So that was successful. Stephen King definitely got me with that ending now that I remembered it. Whoo! Ugh, gross. Okay, so that's it. That's Pet Sematary. All right, so my first 4-star read, so this is the lowest ranked of my 4 stars. There's more 4 stars than there are 5 stars. So a bulk of the things that I've read of his I've enjoyed, but like not enough to give it that 5-star rating. So this would be The Outsider. So this is one of his newer novels, newer adaptations, and what really brought me to this one was I had heard that in order to read The Outsider, I had to finish the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. So you'll see the Mr. Mercedes trilogy inside this stack as well. And then once I was done with the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, the Bill Hodges trilogy, that's what it's actually called, then I was like, yes, I want to pick this up, because I had been intrigued by this cover. This cover really got me when I first bought it. This is only like a small snippet of what this book actually is about. A living nightmare has come to Flint City, Oklahoma, as an 11-year-old boy is found brutally murdered in a local park. An unspeakable crime that rocks local law enforcement to its core as the most heinous atrocity anyone there has ever witnessed. Equally stunning is the identity of the prime suspect, Terry Maitland, one of Flint City's most popular citizens, as well as the Little League coach, English teacher, and devoted husband and father. So that's the setup, and then we follow the detective and his team and some other various points of view that come into play. I feel like we get past this like murder plot, we get into the true meat and potatoes of what this book is really about. I found myself realizing we were reading a story about El Cucuy, and that was interesting to me. So now I was like, I kind of want to read the actual Mexican version of El Cucuy and just kind of like immerse myself a little bit more familiar into what the boogeyman is according to Mexican lore. That changed a lot of how I viewed this book, and the introduction of a character in here that is who I was really reading this book for. I enjoyed it. I really did. But this was the lowest ranked of my 4-star reads because there were just some stronger contenders, even though I personally did enjoy this one. I know to some Stephen King purists, maybe some of his newer works aren't that especially great, but I did like this one. So this one was a 4 out of 5-star read. Then I was continuing on with more of his newer things, and so that's when I picked up The Institute. And again, this was like a pure cover buy, but I got so thoroughly disturbed by Needful Things and Misery and Pet Sematary that you'll find that there's a lot more mystery thriller Stephen King books in this finished list than there are the horror novels. And so this was me really exploring the idea of the mystery thriller aspect. So there's a young boy who has been kidnapped from his bed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and brought to this institute. I think it's in Georgia. And it's this place where they hold a lot of children with special abilities. And so when I read Firestarter, I actually was like, wow, so the Institute is kind of the story of Firestarter in reverse. Like, they're not the same government entities, but like, this is like definitely like a what if tale. What if the kinds of kids like Charlie were rounded up and kept under the same roof, and what would their life be like there? So I really liked it. There were also the side characters, like the prologue to this book, one of the main adult characters that we follow. I kept wondering, like, how is this gonna come together? And when they finally do, it just made so much sense, and I was just so happy to read it, and it was just like one of those moments for me personally where I thought Stephen King did just a really great job with the characters, because that's what really pulled it through for me and made this a successful Stephen King novel for me. So loved it immensely. And that's why I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I began picking up more of his books that he wrote as Richard Bachman. So this is a book that I actually also read this year. This is The Running Man. It's this man who enters into become a contestant for the Games Network. Like, this is a dystopian United States where, like, the television Games Network seems to have a lot of power over everybody. And there's definitely, it's a story of the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots, this man being one of them, he's so desperate that he enters into this competition for his life. And if he ends up winning, then he gets all the power, prestige, and money to be able to support his family. And a lot of people say that, like, this is definitely like a grown-up, pre-Hunger Games kind of situation, which, sure, you can read it that way. But on its own, I think it was incredibly powerful. I liked the ending a lot. I liked how it all came together, because this is like a seemingly impossible scenario of this man even surviving this contest. And so I really liked the way that it ended. Then that brings me to Mr. Mercedes and the Bill Hodges trilogy. So both Mr. Mercedes, which is book number 1, and Finders Keepers, which is book number 2, I gave them 4 out of 5 stars. I loved this whole trilogy. but not all books in the trilogy were created equal. I enjoyed Mr. Mercedes more than I enjoyed Finders Keepers, but each had their own different merits. I don't think I would have missed out on Finders Keepers if I had just read Mr. Mercedes and then End of Watch. Like, yes, we followed the same cast of characters in Finders Keepers, but this was an entirely different mystery. So this is retired police detective Bill Hodges. He is content to live on his retirement and be a grumpy old retired police detective. What ends up happening is this very tragic accident ends up happening in the Chicago city center. There was a huge job fair. There's a ton of people there who are living and just not being able to make ends meet. Very big recession time. This person hijacks a Mercedes vehicle and plows right into this group of job fair seekers. And there were people who died. There were people who came away with gruesome injuries. And that was a case when Bill Hodges was still on the force. Now that he's retired and the perpetrator has not been caught, he has found himself with just a little bit more time on his hands to be able to put that case to rest. He gets some taunting letters through like email and stuff, and he enlists an unlikely cast of characters. And his journey throughout 1, 2, and then the 3rd book were so wonderful. I listened to all of these on audiobook as well, and he was a character that like Stephen King really brought to life for me. Holly Ghibli, I keep wanting to say Holly Golightly, not the same character at all. Holly Ghibli was another great character, just like this wonderful found family, this wonderful strong aspect, but also trying to find bad guys and prevent mass killings. It was so great. It was so great. This is definitely a trilogy that I wish I could like reread for the first time, you know, because like it was so exciting. New things happening every corner. This 2nd book follows this novelist. Okay, now I have to remember. It's a novelist. When he dies, his unfinished novels, that's what it is. Like, he's an old novelist who was super successful, but he had several unfinished manuscripts, and he was murdered, and when he dies, one of the murderers finds these unfinished manuscripts, falls in love with them, and decides to preserve them for just himself, because he knows they're going to be worth a lot of money. And it follows, like, kind of what happens to the missing manuscripts and how Bill Hodges and the agency are brought into that whole thing. The next book, I would put it on my list of like most surprising reads of 2022. And this is Dumake. I went into it with really low expectations, not because I didn't think it would be good. I definitely bought this because I heard several people say that this was actually pretty great. But I don't hear a lot of like Stephen King fans talking about it. So I just kind of like didn't totally know what I was going to be in for. What the description of the book is versus like the outcome of the book, vastly different kinds of things. It just takes us on a whole journey of redemption and love and sacrifice. And so it follows this man named Edgar. He lived in Minnesota and he had been injured on the job. He worked in construction. It was a career-ending injury for him. And so he takes what money he can. Things with his home life end up going awry. His wife divorces him in the midst of all that, and he decides that he's going to move out to the Florida Keys and just get away from everything. Like literally just start anew and just get away from everything. And he ends up renting this beach house and takes up art and painting. And the connections that he has with the paintings and the connections with this Florida Key, like there's just kind of like a mysterious aspect to this island. It was completely unexpected. I just couldn't stop thinking about it as I was listening to it. Then you know it's a good sign. So if you've kind of been searching for something like that, like a character who's just kind of searching for purpose kind of book, and don't mind a little bit of a long one, this one's really good. So that was very, very surprising for me. That was a 4 out of 5 star. I'm back. I had to consult with my Stephen King list to make sure that I was letting you know the correct star rating for this book. Now, this book is a book that I absolutely loved. It wasn't a 5-star. That's what I wanted to make sure. Was this a 5 or was this a 4-star? Because in my feelings, it's very highly rated for me, but it was still a 4-star read. That is The Long Walk. He wrote it as Richard Bachman. For a short book, this packs a punch. This is basically a story in a dystopian United States of a young man who enters into this long walk where the whole outcome of the walk is to just walk as far as you can and be the sole survivor of this walk. And it was, you know, it was a road story, a lot of internal thought processing, bonds of friendship being broken, being forged. There was a lot. There was a lot packed into this for being such a short book. And I remember when I finished this, I had several people be like, oh, I'm so glad you love that one. I love that one too. Oh man, the ending of this one was like, not like a sobbing kind of cry, but it was definitely like a solo tear shed kind of cry. This was great, and it's very brutal. It can get pretty gruesome at moments, and I think that's just what makes it one of the best Stephen King books that I read, was just like putting those human moments on a pedestal and putting them out there. It was so good. Okay, now we are here to my 5-star reads. I have 3 5-star reads that I've read of Stephen King, and they are in a very particular order. So the first one, I've already talked about this book this year. This is Billy Summers. And this was a very recent book of his that he wrote. I don't know if he came out with it in 2020. That's probably when he did. 2020? Not 2021. I don't think I read it that recently. Oh, it was a 2021. Well, look at me. I certainly didn't expect to read it like very recently after he published it. But anyway, this is the story of a retired marksman who a retired military person who ends up becoming this like marksman for hire. And he is kind of getting sick of that life too. And he knows that like after this particular job, he wants it to be his last job. He's just kind of over it. And then things take off from there. Like I don't really want to get too specific because this story had a lot going for it. It felt very grim, but like in a good way. You know, there were just like if I were a gamer and I was playing like The Last of Us, that's what this felt like. Not like in terms of apocalyptic anything, but just like it really felt like grimy to me. Of all the Stephen King books that I read last year, this one and the next one that I'm about to mention definitely rose their way to the top of my feels in terms of the way that I couldn't stop thinking about them, that I couldn't stop thinking about the ending for this character. And it was really great. It says part war story, part love letter to small town America and the people who live there. I agree. The characters were just so good. Like literally everything about Stephen King that I love the most is his character work. My second favorite is End of Watch. Is it fair to put it? I think it is. I read it very far apart from Finders Keepers and Mr. Mercedes, so I wasn't like actively in my feels from the previous 2 books. So when I picked this up, I was very surprised. I would say I was pleasantly surprised by the direction that this book took, because it kind of brings us full circle in terms of like Bill Hodges' like detective life and his and the people that he surrounded himself with and the villains that he has met along the way. And I cried at the end of this one. I was really happy with the ending. It's one of those endings like Stephen King tells you from like page number 1 what's gonna happen. Like you already know going into it the fate of the characters. And you're like watching a slow march to that ending and like you don't want it to happen, but it does. And when it does happen, it's so right. It's so good. And that's what really propelled this book above the other ones and why it is my second favorite Stephen King book that I've read. Sorry that I can't get too deep into the plot because there's some major spoilers in here, but and then we have come to my favorite Stephen King book. This would be the most shocking book for me on this list. The fact that it is ranked number 1, the fact that I love it so much, the fact that I would put this like not even at the top of my Stephen King list. This is a book that's like top 5 of my life. And that is it. I can't believe it, especially because the direction of the Stephen King books that I had been reading have been much more mystery thriller than horror, but this book was so much more than just horror. Like, the parts of Pennywise the Clown and the haunting of the children is such a minuscule part of this book. I'm so sad that that's what gets sold to pop culture, of course because of the shock factor, but there are so many like quotable things in here that I was like, how is this book delivering me like all the feelings of my life? Like how is it the one that's doing this to me? I have a bookmark in here for one of the quotes that I love so much. Like, it's one of my favorite book quotes of all time. So we are in the town of Derry, Maine, and the residents of Derry, Maine, there's something sinister that keeps happening to this town. Like, people don't really want to talk about it, but when you escape from Derry, Maine, you also forget about it. And this is how this under thing, like this haunting of the town, has impacted the town's psyche for generations. And that's why I think it was so great, because it's a generational saga and we follow people in their lives and we get flashbacks between adult versions of themselves and the lessons that they have learned since their childhood versions, and the town itself. Did the town learn any lessons? There's so much here that I literally can't believe that this is my favorite Stephen King book, and I can't believe it's one of my favorite books of all time. If I had the stamina, I would reread this every year. I just don't think I have the stamina for it, because it's quite long. I listened to this on audiobook and physical as well. Like, I combined the two to help me get through this book. This was actually, I read this in 2021, or 2020, I don't remember, one of those 2 years, one of the lost years of the pandemic. I picked it up because I was like, I'm just going to rip off the Band-Aid, I'm going to read that book for Halloween. And it turned into so much more. I can't believe it. This is going to be hard to top. I don't think I'm going to have a Stephen King book that's going to impact me the way that this book did. There's still quite a few of the behemoths that I have been saving. I haven't read The Stand yet, as you can see. I haven't read The Shining. I haven't read some of those like big cultural iconic books yet, because I'm a little bit afraid to. I was afraid to begin this one. I'm just like flabbergasted by this book. And so it's definitely top 5, definitely one of my favorite books of all time. There we have it. There has been my journey of the 14 books of Stephen King that I have read. Let me know what you think about these picks down below. And let me know which Stephen King books should I be picking up next. Like I said, I'm currently in the middle of Dolores Claiborne. I've been doing a lot of listening of his books. Like, that seems to work really well for me, just because like then I can just kind of like get comfy and enjoy the character. Do you know what I mean? I think the audiobooks like really help me with that, and I just love character work. So that's the one I'm currently reading. I think right after this one, then the next book that I have to read would be Gerald's Game, because of the introduction of this book and how, I don't know how it relates to each other, but Stephen King himself said in like an author's note that they're related. So yeah, that'll be the next one. But after that, let me know like which ones that I've been putting off do you think I should shoot to the top of my list? Which ones of yours are his favorites? Just let me know all the things in the comment section below. So, does this make me a constant reader? That's the question. Follow me on Instagram if you'd like. My Instagram and Twitter at whatcassread, the same as this channel, so it should be super easy for you to find. And of course, you know how these videos end. I'll talk to you later.